Film is often hyped as offering the opportunity to encounter worlds beyond one's own circumstances and imagination. Watching films of different cultures opens discourses to cross-cultural dialogue. In the past, the lack of Indigenous film within the Australian film industry hindered the social potential for this dialogue to occur. Now times have changed. There are films like Two Bob Mermaid by Darlene Johnson that provide rich insights into the diversity of Indigenous Australia and expose the truths of Australian history. I believe the power of this film, in particular, broadens understanding and encourages debate. Hello, my name is Caitlin Wall, and before I start, I would like to acknowledge that my studies have been conducted upon Turrbal and Yuggera land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, for they hold the traditions, the memories, the hopes, and the culture for all Indigenous Australians. I would also like to acknowledge you, my listeners, and hope that you found the film as powerful as I did. For those unacquainted with Indigenous history, the issues this film discusses may be confronting, but it is a conversation that I believe every Australian should be exposed to. The reality is, most films about the past have been created from a white anthropological narrative and more often than not fail to include any Indigenous perspectives from a social or political standpoint. For years, anthropological texts and films have created a fictional Aborigine who would be found in the bush making spears and hunting wildlife. These white narratives tried to fit a complex culture into the boxes of Western life in all aspects and do not currently represent the ideologies of Aboriginal Australians. Furthermore, Aboriginal Australia once had over 500 different tribes with completely different sets of values and ideologies. Aboriginal Australia is full of very complex cultural and kinship systems that are not homogenous. Today, contemporary Aboriginal Australia is thriving, adjusting, and most importantly, surviving amidst a long history of dispossession and assimilation. Two Bob Mermaid is a captivating short film written and directed by Darlene Johnson, a Dangati woman from Sydney. The film portrays a young Aboriginal girl named Corinne who hides her identity from her school friends to gain access to the local swimming pool, a place where Aboriginal people were legally banned at the time. Corinne's innocent dream of becoming a swimming star like Dawn Fraser is clouded by strict assimilation policies put in place by the Australian government. Subsequently, she begins to ignore her family members to go to the local pool with her non-Indigenous friends. Her mother scoffs at the idea of her being a swimming star and says swimming is for white fellas. Corinne is stuck between two worlds, and it's clear that she's just looking to be accepted. Two Bob Mermaid is an attempt to rewrite, to reportray, refocus history along with the complex relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people during this period. Darlene Johnson directs this film from her own experiences as a fair-skinned Aboriginal woman. As a result, it explores thought-provoking content, including the concepts of race, segregation, and family. At the beginning of the film, Corinne is swimming with her friends at the local pool where her brother calls out Tita from behind the fence to get her attention. Tita is an Aboriginal word and in this context means sister. She ignores him, and her friend Eleanor states that no matter what you do for them, they still look like a bunch of monkeys, in a disapproving tone, obviously directed at those over the fence. The camera pans to Corinne's face, where she is looking nervous and very uncomfortable, obviously torn between two conflicting worlds. This is an important scene because it reflects how people would have felt throughout the assimilation process. In 1937, the Commonwealth Government held a national conference on Aboriginal affairs which agreed that Aboriginal people not of full blood should be absorbed or assimilated into the wider population. The aim of assimilation was to make the Aboriginal problem gradually disappear so that Aboriginal people would lose their identity in the wider community. Johnson portrays the insanity of the assimilation policy, and while viewers may react in disbelief to the segregation and discrimination portrayed in this film, this was indeed a reality for people at that time. Protection and assimilation policies which impacted harshly on Indigenous people included separate education for Aboriginal children, town curfews, alcohol bans, no social security, lower wages, and laws that segregated Indigenous people into separate living areas, mainly on special reserves outside towns or in remote areas. In the first minute of the film, Johnson depicts a group of young Aboriginal youths clinging to the fence, clearly locked out and banned from entering the premises. Later in the film, everyone in town goes to see the new movie Million Dollar Mermaid, and there are two doors for entrances. Indigenous people enter through the back. Once everyone is seated in the theatre, someone points out to the two Aboriginal people up the front that they should remember to pipe down, as if they were going to cause a commotion. Furthermore, Johnson includes racial slurs such as filthy bull to further emphasise the depths of the racism embedded. I mean, these are just young children and they're using words like that, so that just goes to show what it was like back then. These practices dehumanised Aboriginal peoples as inferior and denied them the basic political, social and economic rights of citizenship. Aboriginal people have subsequently endured mass incarceration, banishment to missions, and the forced removal of their children, all sanctioned through official government policies. The living conditions are evident throughout the film. Corinne and her family are living in a tin shack on the skirts of town. From the late 19th century until the 1970s, children of lighter skin were removed from their Aboriginal families and communities and institutionalised as part of a racist system of intervention that was sanctioned and supported by state legislation. As part of the language of assimilation, these children were expected to absorb or be merged by eventually marrying white Australians. Whilst some states opposed miscegenation through biological absorption, others saw it as a means through which the demise of Aboriginal population could be imagined. Therefore, interracial relationships were regarded as problematic because they symbolised the mixing of irreconcilable dichotomies, civilised versus uncivilised. White colonisers believed that they could measure the dilution of race, introducing discourses in blood quantum throughout early to mid-1900s. Blood provided a conceptual framework for talking about blood in the colonial context, yet it was largely through one's skin colour that the fullness of one's Aboriginal blood was determined. This set of ideas is reflected in this film through the acceptance of Corinne in comparison to her family, purely based off her skin colour. I would like to pay particular attention to the concept of blood and the differences between Indigenous and Western definitions. To the Western world, blood is something all humans have, but it can only be measured by medical expertise. It is tangible and measurable substance. To Indigenous peoples, blood could have a deeper spiritual connection. To talk about blood is to talk about temperament, kinship, ancestry, ethnicity, and spirituality, as well as human body functions and physiology. Blood is thicker than water. Obviously, through years of assimilation and sexual exploitation of Aboriginal women, there has been a shift in defining Aboriginality. Australian government now defines an Aboriginal as someone who is a member of the Aboriginal race of Australia, identifies as an Aboriginal, and is accepted by the Aboriginal community as an Aboriginal. On the concept of blood, it is clear that Corinne has a non-Indigenous parent, and the film acknowledges the familial breakdown. At 7 minutes, Corinne is laying in bed being kept up by her mother and her mother's boyfriend. The scene changes to a photo of Corinne's mother and real father, and there is an overwhelming feeling of loss and longing. Corinne's real father is not Indigenous, and this film reflects the realities of interracial couples in this time era, further diminishing her sense of acceptance and probably love. Corinne is having an identity crisis. She is not accepted for who she really is by the non-Indigenous community, and she is not accepted for who she wants to be by her own family. I would like to reflect upon Two Bob Mermaid in relation to my own experiences as an Aboriginal woman. As Hylas Maris so gracefully writes, I am a child of the Dreamtime people, part of this land like the gnarled gum tree. But I never forget that I'm also part of an extended interfamily network composed of Irish and New Zealander heritages, and an even wider-ranging, multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. Like Corinne, my racial identity is something I continually negotiate on a daily basis. Every day, I have to juggle people's perceptions of a traditional Aboriginal and justify my position as an Aboriginal woman. Every day, I find myself having to respond to, "You're not the Aboriginal I had in mind." Like Corinne, I often find myself in situations where people do not know my identity and I'm treated differently. I've seen and felt this sort of discrimination firsthand, and I've seen the way people's faces change when I tell them about my Aboriginality, whether it's good or bad, and I've had both reactions. My journey has at times caused distrust, Yet out of this mess comes a belief in healing and restoration that will liberate me, my people, and this country from the claws of racism. I want to encourage people to be having these difficult conversations that deal with differing perspectives in order to break the chain of distrust and destroy stereotypes. In conclusion, Johnson has directed a film which has allowed viewers to gain more knowledge about the experiences of Indigenous Australians during the assimilation era. Two Bob Mermaid is a film that touches on Aboriginality, race, and the importance of family. There is hope for reconciliation as Johnson attempts to not only educate, but to allow for alternative versions of our nation's past to come forward. The power of this film, in this instance, not only helps to educate as well as entertain, but more importantly, to stimulate discussion and debate. Thank you.